way to, make sure you're doing what God wills, right? The problem, of course, is that along comes Aristotle's philosophy that says there's no such thing. We're just talking about the meaning of words as if they really exist when they actually don't. In order for there to be existence, you have to have matter. And so as far as Aristotle is concerned, this whole thing just goes away, and we incorporate the ideas into here. So you have matter, and you have the ideas, which you could also call the shape or the forms of things. And then, remember, you have the process by which things change their shape, which you call the efficient causes of things. And then the telos, or the purpose. We get Aristotelios, right? So you get these four different aspects that we can study. So those are causes, categories of things. Everything has all four of these, or it doesn't exist, right? Okay, so this philosophy comes and says your whole spiritual world, everything that you're trying to live for, is all nonsense. That's Aristotle. And so how do you incorporate that philosophy into the church dogma without basically throwing out the church, right? So Aquinas basically says both Plato and Aristotle are correct. Plato's right that there's the physical world, or what you might call Earth, of course. On the other hand, there's also the spiritual world. And in fact, the spiritual, the conceptual world, are the essences. So what is the essential aspect of something is the idea of the thing. And the earth is just the physical representation of that, right? And so you end up then with spiritual matter. What the heck could be spiritual matter? That sounds like a contradiction in terms. And you also have the spiritual ideas themselves, and you also have the efficient cause and the telos. In other words, all four of the characteristics that Aristotle applies to matter only, Thomas duplicates. In fact, another way of talking about what Thomas Aquinas did was he duplicated or doubled the ontology. Ontos is the study of what there is, and so he basically doubled what there is, right? So there's not only everything in the physical sense that Aristotle talked about, but there's also everything in the spiritual sense in the duplicate.
It's kind of like a yin and yang, like you can't acknowledge one without giving the acknowledgement to the other.
Well, I suppose you could apply it that way. But in the sense that we think of the yin and yang in the Oriental sense, it wouldn't really be appropriate per se, here.
Well, I more so look at it in the aspect of like if you're gonna try to break down good versus evil or good and bad, you don't even know the existence of the other without having one. So there is no good if you don't have the bad to judge it against.
And in the Platonic sense, that the way that we understand all of this is through this way of understanding, and our consciousness, in a sense, is there, right? A point you mentioned, though, good and evil, though. Remember, evil doesn't exist per se. It's only our perception that something's evil. That goes back to Augustine, who, in answering the question, how did an all-good God, all-powerful, all-good, make a world where there was evil? The answer is, evil doesn't really exist. Fall gave us the impression that there was good and evil. That's our mistake, right? The universe, as God created it, is all good. The reason that things appear to be evil to us is because we have fallen and we can't see everything as God would see it, and that is all good. So evil exists because of our perceiving it and thinking. So strictly speaking, the universe doesn't have evil in it, even though we perceive evil as existing. If you've not been totally saved, and who has been totally saved to the point where they don't see evil? I mean, even saints like Francis and Ignatius Loyola. I mean, there's so many of them, really. I mean, if you think of it, the ideal for them was to hate the body and love the soul. And what way could they torture the body in order to elevate their soul? And the ones that did that most spectacularly were the ones that were idealized as saints. My goodness, I think I mentioned, even if you're in California and you're traveling along the missions, Father Sierra was one of the ones who was a Jesuit leading, the missions there, converting the natives and so on. And in the one that we visited, I think it's still there as a tourist, you could go visit where his headquarters, the mission where he was considered a headquarters. In his cell was a shelf, the only thing in there actually, and on that shelf was the whip he supposedly used to beat himself with. And by the way, this isn't just a Catholic thing. This is essentially, I think the understanding of a real Buddhist is that they're an ascetic as well. They don't want attachment to the physical world, because that's what's wrong. And you see lots of religions where people on their parades, the young men will go down the street beating themselves bloody, to demonstrate how they're treating their bodies like crap to elevate their soul, right? That's there. Well, of course, Aristotle would think that that's nuts. The main thing for Aristotle is our soul, but the soul is the activity of the body. So without the physical body, the soul isn't moving. There's no soul without it. So when we move into Aristotle's view of happiness, eudaimonia, it's got to be during lifetime. So one of the big things that happens as a result of Thomas accepting Aristotle is he accepts that the soul is not something that exists apart from its physical form. And as a result, in order for us to go to heaven, the body has to go too. So there has to be a resurrection of the body in a very physical sense. And there's all sorts of questions that then apply. Well, what about while we're in the grave and we haven't been resurrected yet? What's going on with our soul? Well, it's waiting. It's obviously there's no activity of the corpse, and so it's pending the resurrection, right? And so that's a nuance that's, I think Augustine, as soon as you die, your soul is going to be associated once again with, heaven. By the way, a lot of people think of heaven, hell, and purgatory, but that wasn't ever officially part of the church's beliefs. That was a result of Dante, the poet, writing Paradisio, Purgatorio, and Inferno, and that poem, that series of poems, really came out at a point of time when the church's authority over who was writing what was kind of lax. And so that crept through, became very popular, and as a result, everybody starts thinking of Dante's Inventions, really, as the official church impression. And the church kind of accepted it. It's, oh, okay. Just recently, though, one of the interesting problems was, what about a fetus? If the fetus dies, or the baby dies, before it's been baptized, is its soul going to go to hell, right? And so there was a limbo that was kind of invented by some folks. And in fact, you could use limbo for individuals that you highly admired, even though they lived before Jesus could have saved them, right? And so you have individuals thinking that people like Socrates would have been in limbo, right? Some kind of a place where the souls, are in limbo. They're not saved. They're not, in punishment, but they're in limbo. Well, the church just like last year came out and said, we never really said anything about limbo, guys. That was not an official thing. And yet, of course, a lot of people consider that to be an essential part of this whole narrative, which is really quite open, I think. And so the
didn't Dante coin purgatory, or was that a concept before?
it was there before. It just comes from purging.
Yeah.
You have to be purged. If you've done bad things, well, you've got to, do some assignments to make up for it. Do extra homework, or go wash the car. There's some kind of punishment that has to happen. You can't just waltz into heaven. One of my favorites is Steve Martin. Wouldn't it be strange, he says, if you died and it's actually the pearly gates, and St. Peter is there, and you come in and you say, well, I guess I'm just coming in, and Peter said, what? You mean you actually kept records on me? And he said, well, I wasn't so bad, was I? And he says, how many times did I take the name of the Lord in vain? 1,000,006. Jesus. Sorry, Steve Martin. Another one of the reasons I'm mentally ill is I listen to an awful lot of Steve Martin. Remember, he was the one in the Death of Socrates sketch. Okay. So think about how Thomas somehow doubled the ontology, said that both Plato and Aristotle are right, which doubles Aristotle, because now everything he said about the world is true, but at the same time, it's also completely true of the spiritual substance. So there's spiritual substance. A perfect example of these is, I already have all kinds of pages up here. I can find them. So, am I in the Summa? Actually, yes. Okay. So, some of the works that Thomas made, the two most famous, are called Summae, which just means summation. So, it's like, an encyclopedia, basically, of answers. And the most important one is the Summa Theologica. So if you have any questions about theology, you can go find them in the Summa Theologica. And they're listed under parts. So you've got, the primary part, the first part, which is sacred doctrine, the existence of God. You have questions about God. Well, we can go check his essence. And remember, the essence is the spiritual, and the existence is the physical. But so if we look at his perfection, etc., remember, God is, by definition, that than which nothing greater can be thought. And you can find it as you look around and so on. And we also can and try to figure out, is the existence of God self-evident? I expected a lot of you to be upset with me last class when I demonstrated that God must exist, even though the definition doesn't give you a whole lot of meat. Sorry about that. You shouldn't associate that with God. But you get the idea. God must exist by definition, and yet the definition makes it impossible for you to add all kinds of other characteristics that you want to, right? So it's a very misleading kind of proof. Even Daniel Dennett, I don't know if you're familiar with Daniel Dennett, but he was one of the four horsemen of the New Atheists, along with Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris. I've mentioned them before.